We essentially have taken the last 50 years of kind of like email client history and abstracted it all away for folks that are building email integrations. So we essentially give developers what they want, a modern REST API that allows you to connect to any email mailbox that's out there. The reason this is really powerful is because the email ecosystem is really complex. There are like millions of different email servers deployed around the world and hundreds and thousands of different client implementations.
Hello, and welcome to o11ycast, the podcast about observability. I'm Charity Majors, co-founder of honeycomb.io.
And I'm Rachel Chalmers with Merriam Ventures. o11ycast is brought to you by Heavybit, a program that helps companies building cloud infrastructure, developer tools, and APIs take their products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com.
If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic or a speaker, find us on Twitter at o11ycast, o11ycast. An email startup in this decade might seem surprising, even a little bit old-fashioned. What opportunities did you find that everyone else seems to have missed?
So a lot of times I have to end up explaining the email ecosystem to people.
Oh boy,
because
this is going to be a 5-hour-long podcast.
I'll keep it short. The TLDR of this is that everybody else's email startups fall into basically two different categories. One is I'm building a new sort of email client that has XYZ feature that's better than everything else that's out there. And funny story, we actually did this for a little while back in the early days. And these startups tend to be pretty short-lived because they have to either get bought or they go out of business because all of the like major tech giants out there have basically set a baseline cost of $0 for an email client by subsidizing them with their other businesses. So like Microsoft has an email client, Google has an email client, and like if you're building an email client as a business, you have to like both be like better in terms of like features in that, but also like get over this like psychological hurdle of like
be freer.
Be freer, which is basically impossible as a way to make money. So I don't recommend doing that. But the other kind of category of other email businesses out there has been started in the past decade is essentially what's called like transactional email sending services. So I consider these to be sort of like the cousin of Nylas in that they're APIs and they have to do with email, but they have a specific use case that they're useful for in that like they're only sending, and when you're sending, you're not authenticating as like a specific person. So these APIs are used for sending like mass emails of like 100,000 people for marketing campaigns and things like that. So there's a specific set of use cases which these APIs are really useful for, and those are things that Nylas is not good at. So we're essentially complementary to these other email services. But the opportunity that no one else had taken advantage of is really seeing the value in the data of email and
not just marketing to people based on that data.
Yeah, exactly. But like, you know, email's been around for like 50 years at this point, and like in the beginning it was just people like sending messages to each other, like, you know, literally like electronic mail. It's like I could send you a letter, or I could, you know, type in the words and then send it through the internet, and then you'll get it and it'll be like a letter. But over the past decades, people have started using email for all sorts of different things. And now it's essentially like the lingua franca of business. People are sending documents, they're like signing contracts, they're setting up meetings.
They're sending highly structured data in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. And yet like the actual data storage that people use for email is like literally just like a pile of documents.
It's 50 years old.
Yeah, it's like a giant file cabinet that's like in chronological order of like what.
It wouldn't surprise me if it were a literal file cabinet with one really overworked clerk just running.
Yeah, seriously.
Indexes, file catalogs, all this stuff. Well, this seems like a really great chance to introduce yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So, hi everybody. My name is Christine Spang, and I am the founder and CTO of Nylas. We are a technology startup based in San Francisco and New York, and been around for over 5 years at this point. Always blows my mind whenever I say that, because I definitely didn't expect it to work out this well when I started the company. I might have cut
you off a little bit when you were talking about the value prop, so please continue if so. Sorry.
Anyway, the company is like, it's like 45 people at this point, which always blows my mind. But I guess to kind of circle back and talk a little bit about what we do. So we essentially have taken the last 50 years of kind of like email client history and abstracted it all away for folks that are building email integrations. So we essentially give developers what they want, a modern REST API that allows you to connect to any email mailbox that's out there. And essentially, like, an end user can connect their mailbox to some developer's application, and then the developer gets a token, and then they can, do all of the CRUD operations on a mailbox. And the reason this is really powerful is because the email ecosystem is really complex. There are like millions of different email servers deployed around the world, and there's a few different kind of major families of like types of email servers and like hundreds and thousands of different client implementations. So because email was like originally like created as this kind of open standard, and it allowed for there to be this innovation in terms of like what the email servers who were built by, who's building the mail clients, and just like the complexity that built up over that time has made it very hard to build things.
Once you give people a really flexible, open-ended thing that they can, it's really hard to rein that in. It's really hard to dial it back to a more structured and less open-ended way.
And at the same time, email has been, for me personally, and for everyone, I think, who's used it for the last 20, 25 years, like the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I imagine that sticking an API in there is going to like present you with some really significant performance challenges. People are very intolerant of slow delivery. How do you make your API go really, really fast?
So there was like a really fundamental decision that we made early on when building Nylas, which actually was really scary at the time. But looking back, it was really fundamental, and I think it worked out for the best. And that decision was essentially we essentially had two different options for how do you build this thing. One is like we could be like a proxy layer where essentially someone makes a request to our API, and we like translate that into like the Google API way to like request the data, or like the Microsoft API way to request that data. But we like threw this idea out really fast, specifically because of this like speed requirement, and also for reliability. So essentially what we decided to do was basically like build an email client that lives in the cloud and that is fronted by an API, so that we are constantly like syncing and caching a copy of this data so that we can serve it really quickly. That means there's like a couple different kind of components of our service, which makes it more complicated than like some random API that does something simpler, in that like an API request for us is really boring. It's like literally just like hits a proxy, talks to our application server, loads some data from the database, returns it. But the interesting part there is that data has to be up to date with the backend provider. So our speed is essentially like, it's not just like how fast I can serve a request, but it's like how fast are we getting that data into our system and making it available for end users.
So what performance goals do you set around that? Were there any surprises?
Yeah, so I don't think that there's like anything really weird in terms of like what kinds of things we're measuring. It's all kind of standard, like success rate, latency. But we also have a bunch of custom instrumentation around this kind of like sync service that is keeping our data stores up to date. So for example, we measure like the message ingest rate and like the delta in, so every message has like a timestamp from the server on it, and so we keep track of like the difference between the timestamp on the server and like when we commit it to our database in order to generate metrics, because we want to like make that as small as possible. So that's a really interesting one. And like we don't have like kind of one master metric that like tells us that the system is working, that we've like brainstormed a few different ideas.
Does anyone really? I'm not a big believer in the master metric.
Most people have one. They're just all kind of crappy.
Yeah, I've heard a lot said about like the like Amazon like orders.
Or like pingdom. A lot of people will just set up a pingdom check that runs once a minute from all around the world, and then they'll like literally at the end of the month they're like, our uptime was 99.8%. And you're like, oh Jesus.
It feels all kinds of participation trophy to me.
Oh God, so much yes.
Like sales.
There is something powerful in being able to condense it down to a thing that you can track though. And often when it's your first stabs into this arena, like, it's too depressing to do anything else. Like, you got to get that low-hanging fruit. You got to go, okay, now we're at 99.9. Now let's start to look under the covers.
So maybe it's the difference between testing and teaching to the test, like having a guideline versus optimizing to maximize that.
It is. It's also like when you start, like a lot of people, like at Parse, when I started there, they didn't have anything. Right. They had some health checks. Right. They had nothing. And when we set up a check and it was like, oh my God, this end-to-end check is feeling how much? You know, and then the temptation is to go, oh, the test is flaky and like roll it back out. But usually it's not. Usually it's your infrastructure that is way more flaky than you ever dreamed, and you just have to start paying down that debt.
Yeah, for us, we've tried to figure out, like, can we just, like, measure, like, how many, like, objects are, like, being synced into our system over time, but
which is valuable, but it's not going to catch the problems
like,
before the object gets into the sync thing and out of it, and I really do think the gold standard is end-to-end tests. It's just, it depresses everyone how flaky they are.
And I really think that there's, like, this underexplored area where, like, if you're dealing with a system that's, like, made of state, like, your end-to-end checks are not going to catch, like, a million different things that could go wrong.
Well, talk about that. Like, what are some things you guys have devised for dealing with state problems, for telling whether or not there's a critical corruption bug or anything?
Yeah, we've tried a lot of different things, and I would say that, like, we still don't feel like we have a good solution for this.
That's probably a good sign.
I just think it's a really hard problem.
It really is.
But, like, for example, like, when we, like, make major changes to the sync engine, we've done things like doing, like, side-by-side data comparisons with, like, the old version of the code, just so you can at least see what changed.
Yeah.
For, like, small mailboxes, you can do, like, a manual inspection. We've tried all sorts of, like, data snapshotting type things. But they're all really complicated systems in terms of
and
testing.
And expensive.
Yeah.
You know, when we were rolling out our storage engine, we rolled out a change that did compression. And so we kept both copies for a while. Well, that was expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, we needed it to gain confidence, but it's definitely a pretty tough trade-off.
I really feel like people are at least not talking about this particular problem.
People don't talk about the fact that the closer that you get to storing bits on disk, the more paranoid you have to be. Like, the game all changes. Like, a lot of people who are used to living their lives up in, like, happy fairyland where it's all APIs and, everything's abstracted.
Imagine
like,
that you have,
bits
like,
get on disk. Like, that's where your mistakes are permanent. They're irreversible. They can often put companies out of business, and they're often not detectable until it's too late.
Right, and if you have like a CRUD app where, like, the data is not that complicated, it's like an order of magnitude easier.
Yeah, but it's discontinuous, like the complexity and the difficulty and the magnitude of very small errors.
So as you create these goals, as you create these way of measuring whether you're on the right path or not, how do the engineers feel about that? Do they chafe at suddenly having things to be measured by?
Yeah, you were there from literally the very beginning. You know, often when you're like, okay, engineering teams, you've been writing code. Now it's time to have, like, SLAs. Like, did they chafe or did they embrace it?
Yeah, so I would say, like, in the early days, it was not a problem to, like, establish an on-call rotation and some, like, basic metrics and stuff like that, because, like, the alternative was literally, like, the people that were, like, using our platform, like, calling us.
Right.
And, I think that, like, most engineers, like, they want to, like, build something that is, like, useful to people and is reliable, and, like, when they see that a thing is not, like, living up to that, they want to fix it. So
in my experience, there can be friction or disagreements, though, when it feels like there's an arbitrary number that's being imposed upon you, or when it feels like it correlates to someone else's pain, not to yours. And you're like, this doesn't actually reflect the health of the system as I understand it. Why am I, because they don't want to teach to the test. They want to build.
To Spang's point, though, I do feel like that tends to creep in at a later stage.
Yeah.
When it's all early stage and the engineers are building and testing and production.
The numbers at that point,
and it's very personal, and they take real pride in their work. But as organizations scale, they lose that agency and autonomy, and they lose that direct connection between the product of their work and then customer happiness.
Yeah.
I think that's where I see metrics suddenly becoming a real bone of contention.
Do you feel like this is
I've never seen that, like, at Nylas. And
well, Nylas is still at the scale up where I would say everything's really personal.
Yeah.
If you're looking at, BMC or CA or IBM and...
Or if you're like, I think what you're talking about is a stage where you've got salespeople who are going out and selling a number. And the engineers are kind of going, you sold what? Wait, what does it even mean? I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah, responsibility without input.
Yeah, I think that, like, because it's a little bit difficult to, like, define what the end-to-end reliability of our system is, it's also hard to put in a contract.
Yeah.
So, like, we've very intentionally tried to, like, minimize...
contracts. Lawyers are weaselly as fuck. They can figure this out.
What are the contract numbers? Because...
Yeah.
Like, there's just so many details there that, like, we don't want to be arguing about it at a legal level.
How did you know it was time to start introducing these numbers, though?
People were building production things on our service that was in beta.
But I feel like there's it's time to have a number, and then there's our numbers aren't good enough. What are the things that feed into your intuition that it's time for us to level up in the terms of our commitment to our users?
I mean, it's a lot of just talking to customers.
Yeah,
they're very vocal with us about when they feel like.
But there's a difference, I think, between somebody saying your service is not reliable enough right now and we need a clearer guarantee. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we need to know what we can, base it on. Like these, in my experience, they've been two different experiences.
Interesting. I haven't had that experience.
Interesting. Okay.
I feel like because we've been like pretty minimalist in terms of like our like guaranteed SLAs, like smart. It's all based on like, are the customers happy? Like that's the goal at the end of the day. Yeah. So if the customers aren't happy, then we like introspect and are like,
so
what
what's
are we
been your process for coming up with these goals? Is it pretty much, you get in a room with a couple of people and you come out? Are the engineers part of it?
Yeah, obviously the engineers are part of it. A big input into our process is literally our like head of customer support, like categorizing things.
Support teams
and, like,
chronically undervalued in this ecosystem.
Oh my God, yes.
I completely agree with that.
Support and documentation, unsung heroes of our industry.
Like the thing is that like our support team has ended up being like the experts on like what is good and bad about our product.
They can show up to a meeting and they can channel your entire user base and just be like, it's like the voice of God if you dare to listen to it. Like, this is what you should do.
And that's why people don't listen, because it is terrifying.
Yeah, and so essentially what we've ended up doing is trying to like systematize like the kind of knowledge that they're getting out of just like being on the ground with customers every day. And so like we use this tool called Product Boards to kind of identify like what are the different features or improvements or just like projects or reliability things that need to get worked on and associate customer feedback with that. And then we actually have like a scoring system to help us prioritize, which I think that it's like really easy to get into this like recency bias mode where it's like, we're going to prioritize the thing that this customer was really unhappy about like last week. Yeah. Whereas like maybe you've heard like 8 times about a different thing over the past 3 or 6 months, and you just like don't do that because it didn't happen right before your planning process.
I feel like I need something like this.
I don't think that our process is perfect, but it at least feels somewhat data driven.
Process.
Yeah.
So talk us through incident response. Customer calls, customer is not happy. What happens?
Yeah, we have a few different things. So, like, one is, like, we try to proactively realize when there are problems going on with the system through, end-to-end alerting and alerting on some important symptoms. In that case, it's super standard. Like, our on-call engineer is in charge of the incident. They pull in whatever help they need. We try to get it fixed. But where it gets, like, more complicated and nuanced is, like, customer reports, like, I'm seeing such and such behavior that is like not what's supposed to be happening, and then we have to figure out what's going on. So our systems generate a crap ton of data about what they're doing because it's a really stateful system, and we need to like have the breadcrumbs to be able to like diagnose those things when people report them to us.
Do you know how many events get generated roughly on the back end for every API request that comes in your front door?
So again, it's not the API requests that matter. They matter, but it's a small piece.
Sure.
A simple piece. Essentially, like, all of our mailboxes that we're constantly syncing are generating, like, if they're active, they're going to be generating, like, an event every time they sync new data. So, like, imagine how many emails you get every day.
Right.
Or, like, if you, like, mark stuff as unread or add a label or, like, move it to somewhere else.
Right.
Like, all of that is generating, like, changes on our end. And, like, not just that, but like things that the email provider is doing are things that we have to respond to. So I'm not sure what the right order of magnitude is, but it really depends on the email account.
I remember at Facebook, somebody calculated, this took a long time, they calculated that every web request that somebody made to Facebook.com generated between 200 and 500 events on the back end. Just debugging as it made its way through the stack and all the dozens of services and databases and everything.
Yeah, it really blows my mind how you have to like spend like the overhead.
Well, this is why you have to sample. This is why you have to sample. It's like not even a question. For sure.
But it's like, it's not a science, it's an art. It is like,
absolutely an art.
Like, how much money do we want to spend on debugging information? Yeah. How does that affect the speed at which we're able to like debug things?
Spend 200 to 500 times as much on observability as they do on production. And obviously that's not reasonable, so it's always negotiation. It's always an art. I feel like the massaging of sample rates and the massaging of these these are like the replacements in modern day observability for what was massaging pager rules.
Right.
You know, it was just like, it was a job that was never finished, went on forever. You were always trying to find that perfect balance, and it was constantly changing. And it woke you up in the middle of the night. And we're just trying to like move it up the stack a little bit so that you're not getting woken up, but you're still getting those, you know.
And so is the art in setting tiers of importance? What do you do when like there are multiple things broken?
You can't care about everything equally. Do you have explicit tiers?
Yeah, I think that like some of the weirdest things for us to handle are like when they have like complicated steps to reproduce. It's like, well, when I like do thing like X, Y, and Z in this order on like a mailbox, like this thing gets out of sync. And like we have had to keep around some semblance of like in order like events for like our sync service, because like for sync it seems to be really important to have things in order and to not drop like important events.
So like write a head log basically.
Yeah, so like what we end up doing is like try to be really vigilant about like what events are not providing signal and try to just like put them on debug and not log them in production. I mean, if multiple things are like broken at the same time, like we try to like prioritize things according to customer impact, but obviously that's not like a science either.
At Parse, I remember we would prioritize. So the API was P1.
Yeah, so it's like if we're not serving API requests, we better fucking fix that really soon.
Writes are more important than reads, because at least, you know, the reads can catch up later. But it was always the APIs first, then like push notifications and writes before reads. And then like the website was like somewhere way down on like P10 or something.
Yeah. Hey, we don't even like manage our own website. We let marketing
living
do
the
it.
dream.
Yeah, I'm a fan of all of these like tools and services that me and our engineering our engineering team doesn't have to manage that thing.
How have you improved over time? And what else would you like to achieve?
Gosh, like, I mean, it's hard to even compare. Like, our reliability in, like, year one.
Oh, my God. I've known you. I didn't know you then, but I think I've known you since year 2 or so.
Definitely not production ready.
And it's phenomenal, like, how far you guys have come.
Oh, God. I
mean, the scale is, like,
met Spang at seed stage and dragged it into my former employers, and,
Dude, my pitching was so bad then.
God, you should have seen the dudes. No, you and Edith are my big
like,
misses.
Really...
You were very earnest.
Really feeling really awkward and like
it's
all endearing.
Rachel, you're super intimidating. Anyway, what was the actual question?
You know, like,
how we improve.
How do you improve? What do you have left to do?
I'm really proud of just like the fact that like no one else has done this before.
Yeah.
Like literally we've been around for 5 years, and for 3 of those years, I was like, am I a bad engineer, or is this just really, really hard? Because it's like...
It's hard.
We're just, like, constantly, like, fixing things and making it better.
Hard.
And, like, I feel like engineers are naturally often, like, a little bit perfectionist.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm not satisfied with my thing until it's, like, working all of the time. And, like, the nature of, like, software engineering just means that never happens.
Yeah, I think that was the valid pushback on Nylas at seed stage, was like, this is huge. Can it actually be done?
And it takes this much money to store all this email forever.
Yeah, so we had to like figure out how to like sell it in a way that would pay for those costs.
Yeah,
and that's really why we ended up focusing on the business market, because like email's cool, everyone uses it, but it's so much more valuable for businesses. Yeah.
Well, this is what I keep telling people about going after the enterprise market. You go to the enterprise because that's where the money is. That's where you rob banks.
I'm completely
not that
on
enterprise
your side.
Software is bank robbery.
Not that startup founders are robbing anyone whatsoever.
I mean, consumer is like fun, but like...
No, it's not. People are dipshits.
Consumer gets all of the oxygen because the big exits have been consumer.
Yeah,
but you look at enterprise exits, there's more of them, and they're really consistently...
If you're a data company, if you're we're going back to the difference between APIs and data, right? The level of abstraction. Like, if you're a data company, there are just things that are attached to that, and you need to be talking to enterprises. Like, it moves too slowly to keep up with fads like consumers.
I guess, like, I'm really a practical person, and I think it's, like, great to just be, like, a really good plumber.
To be boring.
Yes. This is why I was always drawn to infra. It's, like, hugely, hugely leveraged, like indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
It's, like, the basis of civilization, but nobody pays any attention to it.
It's been so weird for me. It's just this last year, like, learning how to do product stuff, quote unquote. Because I show up and I'm like, they don't know. In infrastructure, I've always showed up and I knew what my priorities were. Because it was do or die. You get this done, or nobody gets to do anything anymore because your databases are not there, you know? And on the product side, they're just like, we don't know. We have to like sniff over after some intuitions or see what people are feeling like this week. To like,
you just have a hard time with human factors because you are at heart a murder bot. I mean, I love that about you, but
good times. Spang.
Yeah,
so lessons learned.
Right. Lessons learned. I was just thinking about how one of the hard problems in enterprise is just being able to explain well what the fuck you actually do.
yes,
true.
Yeah.
And like it took us like
not because the
years.
buyers are dumb, it's because the buyers have enormous breadth and they're
Yeah.
doing all the things all the time, and you just have to find the story that matches their pain.
Right. So it's also like it's tricky in like recruiting because you have to be able to explain like what the value of the company is in a way that like people can like say that at parties.
Yes.
Without
Like,
leaning on all of
not
the,
get
we're
blanks
doing
there.
microservices and Golang and blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
And this is the thing. This, I think, is what distinguishes the really great startups from the ones that don't quite make it, is the ability to tell a story.
I guess like I've had practices with this before because the previous company I worked for was doing like kernel engineering stuff, and like then nobody understood what the fuck I was working on. So like I feel like working on email, it's like it's a lot easier.
That's probably the fundamental part of all three of our jobs is like it's infrastructure, but you need to care about it.
Yeah, I think that like scale and infrastructure and just like making the bits flow in a like useful way is a really interesting problem from like an engineering point of view.
Dude, I go on road trips to look at interesting bridges. You've got me.
I agree. But if there's one thing that over the course of the last, we're almost at 3 years with Honeycomb, looking back, I'm like, all of the mistakes that I knew I was going to make and tried not to make, I nevertheless made anyway, with my eyes wide open. One of them being, we spent the first year writing a storage engine. Now, I'm like, people like me always underinvest in the product, and they don't hire soon enough, and they don't blah, 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 blah. I did not do all those things, and I thought that I was compensating, right? I thought I was leaning hard in the other direction, but I was leaning like half as hard as I should have. So lessons to Spang of, like, if you could just like go back and whisper in the ear of yourself, let's say 4 years ago, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, I honestly feel like the story of this company has been like a bunch of really smart people who had like no experience, like
I don't know why anyone funds first-time founders.
trying
honestly.
to like figure things out from scratch, and it kind of worked. But I also kind of wish that we had like known some like more experienced people and like had some more best practices from the beginning. But I also kind of feel like when it comes to experience, like you don't know that if you had like taken the time or had the experience to like do things right the first time that you ever would have made it
And you
to
can't
like
actually take
the
someone
point.
else's advice and best practices and just adopt
But it's
them
like
without
if we had
understanding
spent
them
like
and having
twice
it
as
work.
long launching the product, maybe
Yeah.
it never would have.
No, I'm a big fan of falling off a cliff and seeing how it works.
So it's like, well, yes, the first version was shitty.
So
but
let's
like,
constrain this to like best practices around like observability and like metrics and stuff. Like, how do you think, if you were doing another startup 2 years from now, what lessons would you take away from this one?
I definitely underestimated the like importance of like trying to figure out how to get consistency right from the beginning. Ooh. And I feel like once you like build a system and like it has all the bugs in it, it's like infinitely harder to like go back and like
because you gotta
like
reproduce the
remove
bugs
them
too.
again because like there's complicated ways
Yeah.
that like they've gotten in there, and then like the person who wrote that code might not even be there anymore. And like debugging is just harder than writing code. So we definitely
Debugging
kind of
is harder than writing code.
Oh, God, yeah.
That should be like our maximum on this.
kind of like shot from the hip on that in the early days, and I'm seeing kind of looking back over time how hard it's been to just like remove those bugs.
But from my perspective, I mean, the reason I invest in first-time founders is precisely because you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you make a mistake that turns out to be something somebody thought was impossible, and you do it, like Nylas.
I really think that there's like this weird thing with startups where like you need to be like persistent and also like
delusional.
just delusional enough to like not give up
Yeah.
until you actually like
It's actually impossible.
get it to like a good enough point.
It's basically impossible, but you don't quite know that, so you keep going.
But
and then-
but I've also like struggled so hard over the years with just like, is this completely pointless and like impossible?
But here you are.
Yeah, it seems to be possible.
So I have to throw this in there at the end, just because Nylas was our first paying customer at Honeycomb. which is a terrible thing to inflict on anyone. I'm so glad we're still friends. What's it like working with services that are immature and bleeding edge? When is it worth it? When is it not? And like, what advice would you give someone else about when to take the plunge and how to evaluate that risk versus reward?
Yeah, I think it's really important to know like the context here, because otherwise you can't figure out what the lessons are. I honestly think we had like a really great experience working with Honeycomb in the early days, partially because like your engineering team is fucking awesome. And so like even in the early days, like the technology worked and it was pretty stable. And I was constantly like just excited and amazed by the fact that like, you know, you guys just had so much experience like building reliable, scalable services. So
we had just come from the dumpster fire that was Parse.
So it's like we never had to worry about like, is this thing going to scale, or like
is so green.
Is this thing going to be like going to actually work? Because we knew you guys and we trusted that.
We were working on the same block.
I think
so you
that
could
like
walk around the block and throw things at us.
Yeah, it was like a 3-minute walk or something like that.
And you're also the dream customer. I mean, you lived the problem statement every day.
So like one was
that's why we wanted you so badly.
We had like
platforms.
We had like a really big pain point, and like when you have a really big pain point, it's like the factors that you're considering are weighed differently because like if it works out, your pain will go away. So I think that like if you don't have a big pain point, you probably shouldn't take a bet on some like tiny little startup. Yeah. But like there were definitely like things that were difficult. Like
what was that pain point?
There were like no documentation and no best practices, and like we would ask questions and be like, "Well, we're kind of just making this up as we go along here."
That's a great question.
But on the other hand, like we could walk around the block and like we had like an engineer from your team come and like literally like plug in the integration for us.
Yeah. That's true. Early startups will be so grateful. They will bend over backwards to help.
And so, like, we knew that there was this trust from just, like, getting that hands-on support and knowing that, like...
What was that key problem that was
your
so
team's
painful?
Brains were, like, working on our problems and trying to solve our pain.
We had all of our brains on a silver platter. They were doing
Yeah. But the pain point was just, like, because we're, like, a multi-tenant platform and... like we have all of these different customers that are using us in different ways. We really need to be able to like drill in and see things from their point of view.
Yeah.
And there's no other tool that like gives us that in the same way that Honeycomb does. So
yeah, it's technical empathy.
Yeah. So like
it is.
Like I had to really like become an evangelist for Honeycomb to my team because there wasn't the brand for that. Like, it was hard to explain.
Yeah.
So, like, I had to go...
not have it figured out how to explain it at all.
I had to go, like, teach the team...
You were really helpful with
like,
that, actually.
how useful that was. But I think the really key points is that, like, we had this huge pain point that this product solved, and we had, like,
the personal ties and the investment.
Personal ties and, like, partnership, trust relationship. And I think that, like, you can, like, develop that with someone that you don't know personally, but it's going to take FaceTime, and you got to treat it like a relationship and not like something that you're gonna get kind of with like packaged with a bow tie on it.
I feel like a good rule of thumb for me, if I'm asking someone to adopt something that is brand new, I have to be able to say that I think it's 10x better than what they have. Mm-hmm. You know, that's if I can say that, then I can say it's worth the pain. Trust me.
Yeah,
you know?
For sure.
And if not, it's probably not. Like I never would have gone after somebody for first customer who didn't have the pain of a platform where I knew that we could have that much of an impact because I didn't want you to have a bad experience.
Yeah, and at a sense, like we didn't know what we didn't know, and we're like, you guys build Parse and know things that we don't about building platforms, and so there was that also kind of line of trust of like, hey, we think we need this tool, and like these people that have used it or used something like this on a similar type of problem.
We're eternally grateful. And it's been so much fun watching Nylas grow up over the past couple years.
So much fun.
I'm really excited to see
totally.
what we do
I'm sad that you guys
and congratulations
are not
belatedly on your Series B.
Anymore.
I know, we're 3 blocks down from you now.
It takes like...
a long 3 blocks.
Come on, it takes like... I guess you guys moved again.
Yeah, we did.
I'm not sure I've seen the new office yet.
You've been by for happy hour once.
No, not the new one. I've only been to the one way down.
We should resolve this.
The one next to the bar.
Party time.
Thanks so much, Spang. It's always great to see you.
Well, that's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic or speaker, find us on Twitter at o11ycast, o11ycast.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com to check out the library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.
Have a lovely day.